The quiet hum of the late-night shift filled the hallways of the luxurious Havenview Hotel in downtown San Francisco. Sophia Harper pushed her cleaning cart along the plush carpet, her thoughts drifting to the long hours ahead. It was just another routine night for her, a rotation through the penthouse floor where the city's elite lived out lives far removed from her own. Her mind was elsewhere when a muffled thud broke the silence. She froze, gripping the edge of the cart. The sound had come from the penthouse suite, a spacious room reserved for Jameson Carter, the notoriously private tech mogul. Her brows furrowed. It could have been anything, a dropped phone, a piece of furniture, but something about the sound gnawed at her instincts. Sophia hesitated, glancing up and down the empty corridor. "Hello," she called out, her voice soft but firm as she approached the door. No response. She knocked lightly, her knuckles tapping against the heavy wood. "Mr. Carter, is everything all right?" Silence. Her pulse quickened. Training from her past life as a nurse began to resurface, unbidden. Another knock, this time more forceful. Still nothing. Sophia reached into her pocket, pulling out the master key. "I'm coming in," she warned, her voice trembling slightly. Her hand tightened around the cool metal as she slid the key into the lock and pushed the door open. The air inside was unnaturally still, the faint scent of expensive cologne mingling with something metallic and sharp. Her eyes scanned the dimly lit room until they landed on a figure sprawled across the polished marble floor. Jameson Carter. For a split second, she froze, the enormity of the situation crashing over her. Then instinct took over. She dropped to her knees beside him, her fingers trembling as she checked his pulse. It was weak, thready, but it was there. His chest rose and fell shallowly, beads of sweat glistening on his pale face. "Stay with me," she murmured, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Sophia's mind raced as she assessed his condition. She unbuttoned the top of his shirt, ensuring his airway was clear, and began chest compressions, her movements precise and deliberate. The sterile rhythms of CPR, a skill honed years ago in a very different life, came back to her like a second nature. "Come on," she urged under her breath, counting the compressions. "You don't get to quit now." Her arms burned, but she didn't stop. Time stretched into eternity, each second marked by the sound of her desperate efforts to keep him alive. Somewhere in the distance, faint sirens grew louder, their wailing harmonizing with her racing heart. Relief flickered at the edges of her resolve. Help was coming. When the paramedics arrived, Sophia stepped back, her chest heaving as they took over. One of them, a tall woman with sharp efficiency, turned to her and nodded. "You saved his life," the paramedic said, her tone firm but grateful. Sophia shook her head. "I just did what anyone would do." Sophia stood back, her legs trembling as she watched the paramedics work. The suite, once immaculate, was now filled with the harsh sounds of medical equipment and hurried commands. The surreal nature of the situation hit her like a tidal wave. Just moments ago, she had been preparing to clean yet another room. Now she was witnessing a battle between life and death. Jameson Carter, a man she'd only known through whispered conversations among staff and the occasional headline in the tech world, was being loaded onto a stretcher. His reputation preceded him: brilliant, cold, and relentless. Yet, lying there pale and vulnerable, he looked nothing like the untouchable mogul the world revered. As the paramedics wheeled him toward the elevator, one of them paused beside her. "We'll take it from here. But really, what you did back there, that saved him. Most people wouldn't have acted so quickly." Sophia offered a faint smile, though her hands still trembled. "I just knew what needed to be done." The paramedic nodded before disappearing down the hallway, leaving Sophia alone in the aftermath. The silence that followed was deafening. She exhaled shakily, her gaze dropping to her hands, which still bore faint traces of sweat and effort. Memories she had long buried began to surface. Training sessions at the hospital, the sharp sting of failure when a life couldn't be saved. This time had been different, but it still left her chest tight with unease. Sophia glanced around the suite, her instincts kicking back in. She picked up her cleaning supplies, moving to tidy up the few items disturbed during the chaos. The motion was mechanical, a way to ground herself after the adrenaline surge. She didn't expect gratitude or acknowledgement from someone like Jameson Carter, but a part of her felt oddly connected to him now. Life had a way of weaving strange threads. As she stepped back into the hallway, Sophia pulled her phone from her pocket. Her first instinct was to call Emma, her closest friend at the hotel, but she hesitated. What could she even say? That she had just saved a billionaire's life? It sounded absurd even to her. With a sigh, she slipped the phone back into her pocket and pushed the cart forward. Her shift stretched into the early hours of the morning. Though her body moved through the motions of her work, her mind remained on the penthouse. She replayed the scene in her head, the stillness, the panic, and the steady rhythm of compressions beneath her hands. No matter how much she tried, she couldn't shake the weight of the moment. When her shift finally ended, Sophia lingered by the lobby exit. The usual buzz of activity had quieted as the hotel settled into its nightly lull. She gazed through the large glass doors, where the first hints of dawn painted the city skyline. For a fleeting moment, she considered heading to the hospital to check on him. But she shook the thought away. Jameson Carter wasn't her responsibility anymore. She had done her part. Whatever came next was out of her hands. With that, Sophia stepped into the cool morning air, unaware that her life had already begun to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The sterile hum of fluorescent lights buzzed softly in the background as Jameson Carter's eyes fluttered open. Blurred shapes and muted colors greeted him, their edges sharpening slowly. His chest ached, a deep, dull pain that throbbed with every shallow breath. Disoriented, he turned his head slightly, taking in the machines beeping softly around him. A hospital. The realization struck, heavy and foreign. "Mr. Carter," a gentle voice called, pulling him from his thoughts. A nurse appeared beside him, adjusting the heart monitor strapped to his chest. "You're awake. Try not to move too much." "What happened?" Jameson rasped, his voice barely audible through the dryness in his throat. He winced, the effort sending another jolt of pain through his chest. "You experienced a heart attack," the nurse explained, her tone calm but firm. "It was serious, but you're lucky. Someone at the hotel started CPR immediately and kept you stable until the paramedics arrived. That made all the difference." Her words sank in slowly. Jameson frowned, his mind struggling to piece together the fragments of the night before. "Who?" he managed, his tone tinged with confusion. "A hotel employee," the nurse said, offering a faint smile. "She saved your life." The thought felt absurd. Saved by someone? A stranger, working at the hotel? Jameson's world had always revolved around precision and control, where outcomes were dictated by strategy and calculation. This was something entirely beyond him. As the nurse continued her tasks, Jameson stared at the ceiling, his thoughts churning. Flashes of memory teased the edges of his mind. Voices, hands pressing firmly on his chest, the distant wail of sirens. The details were blurred, but the desperation in those moments was unmistakable. For a man who prided himself on invulnerability, the vulnerability of needing to be saved left an unfamiliar weight pressing against him. "Your sister will be here shortly," the nurse added, snapping him out of his daze. "She's been waiting since last night." Jameson gave a faint nod, though his attention had already drifted elsewhere. The face of the person who had saved him remained elusive, like a puzzle he couldn't solve. For someone accustomed to having all the answers, the not knowing gnawed at him. Minutes later, soft footsteps entered the room, followed by a familiar voice. "Jameson," Sophia Carter said, her tone equal parts relief and exasperation. She crossed the room quickly, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. "You scared me half to death." Sophia's presence was both grounding and jarring. She had always been the emotional foil to his pragmatism, reminding him of the humanity he often overlooked. "I'm fine," he muttered, though the lie felt weak even to him. Sophia raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Fine?" "You had a heart attack, Jameson. That's not fine." Her voice softened, her worry breaking through. "Do you even realize how close you were?" Jameson turned his head away, his jaw tightening. The vulnerability in Sophia's voice unsettled him. He hated the idea of being a source of worry, of appearing weak. Not to her, not to anyone. "I'll be fine," he repeated, his tone clipped, though the pain in his chest told a different story. Sophia sighed and pulled a chair close to his bedside. "You always say that," she said, her voice quieter now, tinged with a mix of frustration and affection. "But this time, Jameson, it wasn't fine. If it weren't for that woman at the hotel—" "The nurse mentioned her," he interrupted, his gaze still fixed on the ceiling. "Who is she?" "I don't know," Sophia admitted, "but she works there. A maid, I think. All I know is that she didn't hesitate, Jameson. She saved you." "A maid." Jameson frowned, the words sitting oddly on his tongue. The image didn't align with the sterile professional environments he trusted with his life, the high-profile doctors, state-of-the-art facilities, and carefully curated teams. The thought that a stranger, someone outside his meticulously controlled world, had been the one to keep him alive was almost too much to reconcile. Sophia studied his expression, sensing the conflict behind his stoic exterior. "You should find her," she said simply. "Thank her." Jameson let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Thank her?" The idea sounded almost laughable, yet there was a gnawing sense of obligation he couldn't shake. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the fact that he owed his life to someone he'd never met, or the realization of just how fragile that life truly was. "Yes, Jameson, thank her," Sophia insisted. "She deserves to know that what she did mattered. And maybe it'll remind you that you're not invincible." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. He didn't respond, but a seed of curiosity had already taken root. Who was this woman? What had compelled her to act so selflessly? He didn't know if he wanted to meet her out of gratitude or an almost desperate need to make sense of what had happened. Perhaps it was both. The nurse returned shortly after, ushering Sophia out to allow Jameson to rest. "You'll need to take it easy for the next few weeks," the nurse instructed, her tone firm. "No stress, no overworking. Your body needs time to recover." Jameson gave a curt nod, but his mind was already elsewhere. He watched the nurse leave, the beeping of the monitors a steady reminder of his mortality. For the first time in years, his schedule, the endless meetings, deadlines, and demands seemed irrelevant. All he could focus on was the shadow of the woman who had pulled him back from the brink. As the hours passed, his resolve grew. Gratitude or not, he needed to find her. Not just to thank her, but to understand how a stranger had become the difference between life and death in his carefully guarded world. By the time morning came, Jameson was already planning his return to the Havenview Hotel. Sophia pushed her cleaning cart through the Havenview Hotel lobby, keeping her gaze fixed on the ground as she maneuvered around the polished marble floors. The soft murmurs of early morning guests checking out filled the space, blending with the faint sound of classical music playing over the hotel's speakers. She preferred this time of day, the hours before the hustle and bustle of the late afternoon when the penthouse guests and VIPs demanded attention. But today felt different. There was a strange tension in the air, as though something had shifted overnight. Sophia shook off the feeling, focusing instead on the list of rooms she needed to handle. She was just passing the front desk when she heard her name. "Excuse me," a deep, unfamiliar voice called. She stopped, her grip tightening on the cart's handle. Slowly she turned, her heart sinking as her eyes locked onto the man standing across the lobby. Jameson Carter. He was dressed in a tailored grey suit, his sharp features pale but composed, as though he were still recovering. His presence exuded power, even in the simple way he adjusted his tie before stepping toward her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sophia felt her pulse quicken, though she kept her expression calm. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice even. "You're back so soon?" "I am," Jameson replied, his tone measured. His piercing gaze studied her, as though trying to reconcile the woman before him with the one who had saved his life. "I wanted to find you." Sophia arched an eyebrow, feigning indifference. "Why?" Jameson hesitated, caught off guard by her directness. He wasn't accustomed to being questioned, least of all by someone in her position. "Because," he began, his voice softening, "I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything," Sophia replied quickly, already reaching for the handle of her cart to move on. "I was just doing my job." Jameson stepped closer, his towering frame blocking her path. "Your job is cleaning rooms, not performing CPR," he said firmly. "What you did, it wasn't ordinary." Sophia resisted the urge to roll her eyes, though a flicker of irritation crossed her features. "Well, I didn't do it for recognition, if that's what you're implying." His brow furrowed, and for the first time, Sophia saw something she didn't expect: uncertainty. "I'm not implying anything," he said after a moment. "But I do think you deserve to be thanked properly." She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. There was a sharpness in his tone that betrayed his discomfort, as though the entire situation was as foreign to him as it was to her. "If you're done," Sophia said, her voice cool, "I have work to do." Before Jameson could respond, she maneuvered her cart around him and continued down the hall, leaving him standing there, uncharacteristically speechless. Jameson watched Sophia disappear down the hallway, his frustration simmering just beneath the surface. He wasn't used to being dismissed, especially when he was making an effort to express gratitude, a concept that already felt foreign and uncomfortable. For a moment, he considered letting her go, chalking it up to an awkward encounter and moving on with his day. But something about her composure, her quiet defiance, stirred something in him. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever met. Determined not to leave things unresolved, he approached the front desk. The receptionist, a young man in a crisp uniform, straightened immediately upon seeing him. "Mr. Carter, how can I assist you?" "I need information about that maid," Jameson said, nodding toward the hallway where Sophia had gone. "Sophia Harper?" The receptionist hesitated, glancing nervously down at the screen in front of him. "I'm not sure I can—" "I'm not asking," Jameson interrupted, his voice firm but low. "She saved my life. I need to know more about her." The receptionist fidgeted but eventually relented. "She's been working here for about a year," he said cautiously. "She doesn't talk much about herself, keeps to herself mostly." Jameson frowned, dissatisfied with the lack of detail. "That's it?" "That's all I know, sir," the receptionist said, visibly relieved when a phone call drew his attention away. Jameson lingered at the desk, his thoughts swirling. Sophia's reluctance to engage with him only deepened his curiosity. There was something more to her, a story that went beyond her quiet exterior and sharp demeanor. For a man accustomed to uncovering secrets, the mystery she presented felt both challenging and oddly compelling. Meanwhile, Sophia entered a vacant suite on the executive floor, her chest still tight from the encounter. She worked mechanically, stripping the bed and replacing the linens with practiced efficiency. Her mind, however, was far from her tasks. Jameson's words echoed in her head. It wasn't ordinary. She hated that he was right. What she'd done wasn't ordinary, and it wasn't something she could brush off so easily. But the last thing she wanted was his gratitude, especially when it came wrapped in layers of awkward formality and veiled expectations. She didn't save him for thanks. She saved him because she knew what it felt like to lose someone when there was still a chance to help. A soft knock on the door startled her. She turned to find Emma leaning against the frame, her smile warm but curious. "You okay?" Emma asked, stepping inside. "Fine," Sophia replied, a little too quickly. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Word's already spreading. You were talking to the Jameson Carter in the lobby. What's going on?" "Nothing," Sophia said, turning back to tuck in the corners of the bed. "He wanted to thank me for saving him. That's all." Emma folded her arms, unconvinced. "And?" "And nothing. I told him it wasn't necessary." Sophia's voice was firm, but Emma's knowing look made her falter. "It's complicated." "It doesn't have to be," Emma said gently. "Maybe he just wants to show he's human like the rest of us." Sophia let out a dry laugh. "Jameson Carter. Human. I don't think so." But even as the words left her lips, doubt crept in. For all his arrogance and privilege, there had been something almost vulnerable in his eyes when he'd spoken to her. She didn't know what to make of it, but she had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time their paths crossed. Jameson Carter leaned back in the leather armchair of his penthouse suite, the room bathed in the soft glow of the city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. His laptop sat open on the coffee table in front of him, displaying the hotel's security footage from the night of his heart attack. It had taken some effort to obtain access, though not as much as it would have for someone without his influence. He had been staring at the grainy footage for nearly an hour, replaying the moments leading up to the paramedics' arrival. Every detail of Sophia Harper's actions was deliberate, her movements precise. She had reacted without hesitation, dropping to his side and initiating CPR with a calm efficiency that belied the urgency of the situation. Her focus had been unwavering, her determination clear even through the low-resolution footage. Jameson's eyes narrowed as he paused the video, freezing the image on Sophia's face as she glanced toward the door after hearing the approaching sirens. There was no trace of fear or panic in her expression, only a quiet resolve. It unsettled him, this unfamiliar sense of vulnerability. She hadn't just saved his life, she had done it with a confidence and care that suggested this wasn't the first time she'd been in such a situation. Who was she, really? A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, his tone sharp from the weight of his contemplation. Sophia Carter entered, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She took one look at the screen and sighed, crossing her arms. "You're obsessing," she said bluntly. Jameson didn't respond immediately. Instead, he closed the laptop and gestured for her to sit. "She's not just a maid," he said finally. "You saw the way she handled everything. That's not ordinary." Sophia raised an eyebrow, her skepticism evident. "So what are you saying? She's secretly a doctor who moonlights as a hotel maid?" Jameson frowned, ignoring her sarcasm. "I'm saying there's more to her story, and I want to know what it is." Sophia studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "Why does it matter so much?" Jameson hesitated, the question cutting deeper than he expected. "Because," he said, his voice quieter now, "she saved my life. I don't understand why, and I can't move on until I do." Sophia sighed, leaning back against the couch. "Maybe she's just a good person, Jameson. Not everything needs a reason." But Jameson wasn't convinced. People always had reasons, in his experience, and if Sophia had acted out of sheer goodness, that only made her more of an anomaly in the world he inhabited, a world driven by motives and agendas. Sophia shook her head and leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "You know," she said, her tone softening, "not everything in life needs to be dissected and analyzed. Maybe you just need to say thank you and leave it at that." Jameson leaned back, his hands gripping the armrests. He didn't respond immediately, his gaze drifting back to the laptop. "It's not that simple," he murmured. "She didn't just do her job, she went beyond it. She saved me, and people don't just do that for someone they don't know." "Maybe they do," Sophia countered, tilting her head slightly. "Maybe it's the kind of thing normal people do when they see someone in trouble." Her words landed uncomfortably. Jameson's world didn't work that way. The people around him didn't act selflessly. They acted strategically. Everything was transactional, a calculated move to gain or protect something. Sophia's actions didn't fit into that framework, and that was what bothered him the most. He rubbed a hand over his face, sighing deeply. "I need to talk to her." Sophia stood, her arms crossing over her chest. "Fine, but don't make this about you, Jameson. If you're doing this to soothe your ego or try to make sense of your near-death experience, she'll see right through it." Her words stung, but they were the truth. Jameson nodded reluctantly, watching as his sister exited the suite. Left alone again, he reopened the laptop, his eyes fixating on Sophia's image. There was something about her, something he couldn't explain, but he knew he had to understand. The next morning, Sophia was in the middle of cleaning a suite on the executive floor when a knock interrupted her. She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron before opening the door. Her stomach sank when she saw Jameson standing there, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice cool. "This is a private room. Guests aren't allowed here." "I'm not here to inspect the room," Jameson replied, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Sophia stiffened, her grip tightening on the cleaning cloth in her hand. "I wanted to talk." She closed the door reluctantly, her frustration mounting. "I thought we already talked yesterday," she said, crossing her arms. "I told you, I don't need your thanks." "I'm not here to thank you," Jameson said bluntly. His tone softened slightly as he added, "I'm here because I want to know why you did it." Sophia frowned, her expression guarded. "Why I did what?" "Why you saved me," Jameson said, his voice steady. "You didn't hesitate. You didn't stop to think. You just acted. Why?" Sophia stared at him, caught off guard by the question. For a moment, she considered brushing him off, dismissing him like she had before. But something in his tone, earnest, almost vulnerable, made her pause. "Because I could," she said simply. "Because I knew how and you needed help. That's all." Jameson studied her, searching her face for something more, some deeper motive, but Sophia didn't flinch under his scrutiny. Her answer was honest, uncomplicated, and completely at odds with the way his world worked. "That's it?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "That's it," Sophia replied firmly. "Not everything has to be complicated, Mr. Carter. Sometimes people just do what's right." Jameson took a step back, her words hanging in the air between them. For the first time in years, he was at a loss for what to say. As Sophia returned to her work, he realized that her simplicity, the very thing he couldn't understand, was what made her remarkable. And though he didn't fully grasp it yet, He knew he wasn't ready to let this connection slip away. The grand ballroom of the Haven View Hotel sparkled under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Guests in elegant attire milled about, sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries as soft music played in the background. It was a scene Sophia Harper usually avoided, preferring the quiet rhythm of her work over the lavish displays of wealth and influence that the hotel often hosted. But tonight she couldn't avoid it. She stood just outside the ballroom, clutching the strap of her cleaning cart like a lifeline. Emma had caught her earlier in the break room, practically buzzing with excitement. "Did you hear?" Emma had asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a private event tonight, and it's all because of you." "What are you talking about?" Sophia had replied, her brow furrowing. "It's Mr. Carter. He's hosting a party to thank the staff. Or, well, one particular member of the staff. You." The memory made Sophia grimace. She had tried to slip away unnoticed, but Emma had practically dragged her toward the ballroom, insisting that she at least take a peek. And now here she was, watching from the doorway as Jameson Carter commanded the attention of the room, his towering presence impossible to ignore. He stood at the center of the gathering, a glass of champagne in hand, his voice smooth as he addressed the crowd. "This hotel has always been a place of excellence," he began, his words calculated and precise. "But sometimes excellence comes from unexpected places." Sophia's stomach churned. She could already feel the weight of his gaze, even before his eyes swept across the room and found hers. She gripped the cart tighter, her instinct urging her to leave, but her feet wouldn't move. "Last week I was reminded of what it means to depend on others," Jameson continued, his tone growing softer, more personal. "In my darkest moment, someone stepped forward, someone who didn't have to, but did anyway, and that act of courage and selflessness saved my life." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd as Jameson raised his glass slightly. "Tonight, I want to express my gratitude to Sophia Harper." The room erupted into polite applause, and Sophia felt a wave of heat rush to her face. She wanted nothing more than to disappear, but Emma was already pushing her forward. "Go on," Emma whispered, her eyes shining with encouragement. "This is your moment." Sophia resisted, shaking her head, but Emma wasn't having it. Before she knew it, she was standing in the doorway, fully exposed to the crowd's curious stares. Jameson stepped toward her, his expression unreadable. The applause died down as he gestured for her to join him at the center of the room. "Sophia," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Please." Sophia's hands clenched tightly at her sides, her body rooted to the spot. The weight of dozens of eyes bearing down on her made her chest tighten. She wasn't made for this spotlight, this spectacle. All she wanted was to finish her shift and disappear into the anonymity she'd carefully cultivated. But there was Jameson, standing at the center of it all, waiting for her to move. With a deep breath, she forced her feet forward, her steps measured and deliberate. The murmurs of the crowd faded to a dull hum as she approached him, her gaze fixed on the polished floor. When she finally stopped a few feet away, she looked up, meeting his piercing gaze. His expression was softer than she expected, but his posture still carried the controlled confidence she associated with him. "Sophia," he said again, his voice carrying through the quiet room. "You saved my life, and I wanted everyone to know how grateful I am." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. The room was so silent she could hear her own breathing, uneven and shallow. "I didn't do it for recognition," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "I know," Jameson replied, his tone softer now, meant only for her. "That's why it matters so much." Before she could respond, he turned to the crowd, his commanding presence reclaiming their attention. "This kind of selflessness deserves more than just words. Sophia, if there's anything you need, anything at all, I want you to know that you have my support." Polite applause rippled through the room again, but it sounded hollow to Sophia's ears. She felt like a prop in a performance she hadn't agreed to. Her jaw tightened, and when the applause died down, she spoke again, her voice cutting through the lingering hum. "I don't need anything, Mr. Carter," she said firmly, her words carrying an edge she hadn't intended. "I just did what anyone else would do." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, and Jameson's jaw tightened ever so slightly. He recovered quickly, offering a small, practiced smile. "Not everyone would have acted as you did," he said evenly, though his tone carried a hint of challenge. Sophia took a step back, her hands trembling at her sides. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice clipped, "I have work to finish." Without waiting for his response, she turned on her heel and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. The moment she stepped out of the ballroom, the cool air of the hallway hit her like a wave, and she exhaled shakily. Emma caught up to her moments later, her face a mixture of awe and concern. "What was that?" she asked, her voice hushed. "You just walked away from Jameson Carter in front of everyone." "I didn't ask for any of this, Emma," Sophia snapped, the frustration bubbling over. "I didn't save him to be put on display." Emma fell silent, her expression softening. "I know," she said gently, "but maybe this was his way of saying thank you." Sophia shook her head, her emotions swirling too wildly to untangle. "It doesn't matter. I don't belong in his world, Emma, and I don't want to." But as she pushed her cart back toward the service elevator, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The weight of Jameson's gaze lingered in her mind, and despite her best efforts to ignore it, something about his words, his presence, refused to let her go. Back in the ballroom, Jameson stood alone near the center of the room, his expression unreadable as the guests resumed their conversations. Sophia Carter appeared at his side, her arms crossed and her brow furrowed. "Well," she said, her voice low, "that didn't go how you planned." Jameson exhaled through his nose, his gaze fixed on the door Sophia had disappeared through. "She's not interested in my gratitude," he said, almost to himself. "No," Sophia replied, her tone wry, "but she might be interested in honesty." Jameson's eyes flicked to his sister, her words striking a nerve. He hadn't expected Sophia to be like this, unyielding, unimpressed, and utterly unshakable. It frustrated him, and yet it intrigued him even more. "She'll come around," he said, more to convince himself than his sister. Sophia smirked faintly. "Or maybe you will." As she walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts, Jameson replayed Sophia's words in his mind. He realized that gratitude alone wouldn't bridge the gap between them. If he wanted to understand her, and he found himself increasingly certain that he did, he would have to approach her on her terms. Sophia sat in the break room, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her coffee cup. The faint hum of the vending machine filled the silence, a welcome distraction from the whirlwind of emotions she had been wrestling with since the night of the event. She hadn't wanted to attend, hadn't wanted to be part of Jameson Carter's grand gesture, yet there she was, dragged into the spotlight, feeling more like a spectacle than a person. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Emma entering, her expression a mix of sympathy and concern. "Hey," Emma said softly, sliding into the seat across from her. "You've been awfully quiet today." Sophia shrugged, her gaze dropping back to the cup in her hands. "Just tired, I guess." Emma studied her for a moment before speaking again. "You know, I get why you were upset about the party. But maybe you're being a little too hard on him." Sophia frowned, the comment catching her off guard. "Too hard? He turned me into a showpiece, Emma. That's not gratitude. It's theatre. Emma held up her hands defensively. I get it. But did you ever think that maybe he's just terrible at expressing himself? Some people don't know how to say thank you the right way. Sophia sighed, leaning back in her chair. It's not just that. He doesn't understand what it's like. To be ordinary. To work hard just to survive. Emma tilted her head. Maybe not. But from what I've seen, he's trying. Before Sophia could respond, the door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. Sophia's breath hitched when she saw Jameson standing there, his presence immediately filling the small space. His usual commanding aura seemed tempered, his expression more hesitant than she'd ever seen. "May I join you?" he asked, his voice unusually subdued. Sophia glanced at Emma, who quickly stood and grabbed her coffee. "I'll give you two some privacy," Emma said, disappearing out the door before Sophia could protest. Left alone, Sophia crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "What do you want, Mr. Carter?" Jameson hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "To talk," he said finally, taking the seat Emma had vacated. "And to apologize." That caught Sophia off guard. "Apologize?" "For the party," Jameson clarified, his gaze steady. "I thought it was the right way to thank you, but I realize now it was misguided." Sophia raised an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. "What made you change your mind?" Jameson let out a soft breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "My sister. She's much better at reading people than I am, and she made me realize that I approached this the wrong way." He paused, his tone softening. "I just wanted to show you that what you did mattered." Sophia's posture remained tense, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she studied Jameson. There was sincerity in his tone, but she wasn't ready to let her guard down just yet. "You don't need to prove that," she said, her voice steady. "What I did wasn't about being noticed or appreciated. I just knew I had to act. That's all." Jameson nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I understand that now," he said. "But I also know that people like you, people who step up when it matters, deserve more recognition than they get." Sophia's expression softened ever so slightly, though she kept her walls firmly in place. "I don't need recognition, Mr. Carter," she said quietly. "I've had enough attention in the last week to last me a lifetime." Jameson leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "Then tell me what you do need," he said, his voice earnest. "Because I can see that you're carrying something heavier than what happened last week. And I don't know why, but I feel like I owe it to you to try and help." Sophia blinked, caught off guard by his words. There was no trace of the cold, calculating businessman she'd come to associate with him. Instead, he seemed almost vulnerable. The shift was disarming, and for a moment she didn't know how to respond. "I don't need your help," she said after a pause, her tone sharper than she intended. "I'm fine." Jameson studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sat back, his hands resting on the edge of the table. "Maybe you are," he said evenly. "But fine isn't the same as happy, and I don't think you're happy, Sophia." Her jaw tightened, a flicker of anger sparking in her chest. "You don't know me well enough to make that kind of judgment," she said, her voice low. "You're right," Jameson admitted. "I don't, but I'd like to." His words hung in the air, weighted with meaning. "You saved my life, Sophia. The least I can do is listen." Sophia's breath caught, her resolve wavering under the weight of his sincerity. For years, she had carried her grief and guilt alone, burying it beneath the routines of her work. She had convinced herself that she didn't need anyone, that letting people in would only bring more pain. But now, faced with Jameson's quiet persistence, she felt the smallest crack forming in her armor. For the first time, she allowed herself to meet his gaze fully. "You think listening will make a difference?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with skepticism. Jameson gave a faint smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I think it's a start." Sophia hesitated, the weight of her defenses pressing against her. But something about the way he looked at her, like he genuinely cared, made her pause. She didn't know if she could trust him, but for the first time in a long while she felt the faintest spark of hope. "Maybe," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But only if you're willing to listen to the whole story." Jameson nodded, his expression serious. "I'm willing." As silence settled between them, Sophia felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a step, a small, uncertain step toward something she wasn't sure she was ready for. But as she looked into Jameson's eyes, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face it alone. The tension in the boardroom was palpable. Jameson sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his jaw clenched as his senior executives presented the latest crisis. The air was thick with unease, their voices hurried and strained as they detailed the fallout from the data breach. "We've lost the trust of several key clients," one executive said, his voice tight. "And the media isn't making it any easier. They're painting this as gross negligence." Jameson's eyes narrowed as he scanned the reports in front of him. The numbers were grim. Stock values had dropped overnight, and investor confidence was plummeting. Lucas Gray, his longtime business rival, was taking full advantage of the chaos, making bold public statements that cast doubt on Jameson's ability to lead. "This is unacceptable," Jameson said, his voice cold and measured. "I want every division head working around the clock. We need solutions, not excuses." As the executives shuffled out of the room, whispering amongst themselves, Sophia Carter slipped in, her presence a calming contrast to the storm brewing in Jameson's mind. She sat down across from him, her gaze sharp but empathetic. "Still trying to fix everything by yourself?" she asked, leaning back in her chair. Jameson didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tapped his fingers on the table, his mind racing with strategies. "This isn't just a company issue, Sophia. It's personal. Lucas is using this to undermine everything I've built." Sophia tilted her head, studying him carefully. "And what about the people who are actually affected by this breach? Have you thought about how it impacts them?" Her words hit harder than Jameson cared to admit. His focus had always been on damage control, on protecting his image and his company. But the thought of the individual clients whose lives might have been disrupted by the breach hadn't crossed his mind. Before he could respond, Sophia continued, "You're so focused on beating Lucas that you're forgetting the bigger picture. People don't trust you right now, Jameson. And it's not just because of the breach. It's because they don't see the man behind the company." Jameson leaned back, her words lingering in his mind. She was right, of course. His entire career had been built on control and strategy. But now he was beginning to realize that it wasn't enough. "Then what do you suggest?" he asked, his tone softer now. Sophia smiled faintly. "Start by being human. Show people that you care about more than just the bottom line." Jameson nodded slowly, though he wasn't entirely sure how to begin. For a man who had always operated at a distance, opening up didn't come naturally. But if there was one person who could help him navigate this unfamiliar territory, it was Sophia Harper. Later that afternoon, Jameson found himself standing in the bustling lobby of the Havenview Hotel, his mind still turning over Sophia's words. Be human. Show that you care. It sounded so simple, yet it felt impossibly foreign to him. His world had always been one of polished professionalism, where vulnerability was a weakness and emotional distance was a shield. He spotted Sophia near the elevator bank, speaking to a colleague while adjusting her cleaning cart. She looked tired, her movements precise but lacking their usual energy. For a moment, Jameson hesitated. She had already given him so much, her time, her honesty, her courage, and here he was, asking for more. But if he was going to change the way people saw him, it had to start with her. He approached cautiously, waiting until her colleague walked away before clearing his throat. "Sophia." She turned, her expression flickering with surprise before settling into a guarded calm. "Mr. Carter," she said evenly, "is there something you need?" "Yes," he admitted, his voice steadier than he felt. "Your help." Sophia blinked, clearly caught off guard. "My help?" Jameson nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about listening, and I realized I haven't been listening to the people who matter most. Not just you, but my employees, my clients, the people who depend on me." Sophia crossed her arms, skepticism etched across her face. "And you think I can fix that for you?" "I think you can teach me," he said simply. She let out a soft, incredulous laugh. "Teach you? Mr. Carter, I'm a maid, not a life coach." "You're more than that," Jameson countered, his tone firm. "You've already shown me more about what it means to be human than anyone else in my life ever has, and I don't mean that lightly." Sophia's defenses wavered, but she quickly masked it. "Even if I wanted to help, I wouldn't know where to start." Jameson glanced around the lobby, then gestured toward the sitting area near the windows. "Start by sitting down with me, just for a few minutes." Reluctantly, Sophia followed him to a small corner of the lobby where they settled into a pair of armchairs. The murmur of the hotel buzzed softly around them, but Jameson's focus was entirely on her. "I need to find a way to rebuild trust," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Not just for the company, but for myself. People like Lucas Gray, people who thrive on tearing others down, they don't just go away. And the only way to counter someone like that is to prove him wrong." Sophia studied him, her expression unreadable. "And you think trust comes from what? Grand gestures? Public apologies?" "I don't know," Jameson admitted. "That's why I'm asking you." Sophia hesitated, the weight of his request settling over her. For all his flaws, there was an earnestness in his voice that she couldn't ignore. "Trust isn't about words, Mr. Carter," she said finally. "It's about actions. If you want people to believe in you, start by showing them who you really are." "And how do I do that?" he asked, his voice softer now. Sophia met his gaze, her own steady. "You start by doing what's right, even when no one's looking." Jameson nodded, her words sinking in. It wasn't going to be easy, stepping out from behind the facade he had carefully constructed, but if Sophia believed it was possible, he was willing to try. As they sat there, the beginnings of a plan began to form in his mind. And for the first time in weeks, Jameson felt a flicker of hope. Not just for his company, but for himself. The conference room at Carter Technologies was a stark contrast to the warm glow of the Havenview Hotel. The sleek, modern design of glass walls and polished steel seemed cold and unwelcoming as Jameson stood at the head of the table, addressing his senior team. His expression was serious, his usual commanding tone softened by a new resolve. "We've spent the last week focusing on damage control," he began, his voice measured. "But we haven't addressed the real issue. How this breach has impacted the people who trust us with their data. That has to change." The executives exchanged uncertain glances, unused to hearing this kind of rhetoric from Jameson. He was known for his decisive, often ruthless approach to leadership, not for prioritizing empathy. One of the executives, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, spoke up. "And how exactly do you propose we do that, Mr. Carter? Public statements and compensation packages can only go so far. We start by listening, Jameson replied. Not to shareholders or the media, but to the people directly affected. I want our team to reach out to every individual impacted by this breach. Apologize personally. Find out what they need and make it right. Another executive, younger and visibly skeptical, raised an eyebrow. That's a logistical nightmare. Do you know how many clients were affected? I don't care how difficult it is, Jameson said firmly. We owe it to them. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the team. It was clear that this wasn't the Jameson Carter they were used to. This wasn't a calculated strategy. It was a deliberate shift in priorities. Sophia, sitting at the far end of the table, leaned forward. And what about Lucas Gray? She asked. He's not going to stop twisting this narrative to his advantage. Jameson's jaw tightened, but he didn't waver. Let him. We're not going to win by playing his game. If we do this right, if we show people that we're willing to take responsibility, his words won't matter. Sophia nodded, a flicker of pride in her expression. This was the brother she had always known he could be, stepping up not just as a leader, but as a human being. After the meeting, Jameson lingered in the empty conference room, his mind already racing with the steps they needed to take. He thought of Sophia's words. Do what's right, even when no one's looking. It had become a mantra of sorts, guiding him through the unfamiliar terrain of vulnerability and accountability. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Sophia's name. Without overthinking, he sent a message. Thank you for the advice. It's helping more than you know. Sophia read the message as she sat in the break room of the Haven View Hotel, her coffee growing cold in her hands. She hadn't expected to hear from Jameson again so soon, and his words left her momentarily speechless. It wasn't the usual polished tone she associated with him. It felt genuine, unguarded. For a man who had built his career on control, this glimpse of humility caught her off guard. She hesitated before replying, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Finally, she typed back, I'm glad it's helping. Just don't overthink it. People can tell when it's forced. The response came almost immediately. Noted. And for what it's worth, I'm trying to be better. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm trying. Sophia couldn't help but smile faintly, though she quickly pushed the thought aside. She wasn't about to get swept up in whatever this was. Jameson Carter was still a world apart from hers, and she had no intention of forgetting that. The next day, Jameson stood in a modest community center on the outskirts of San Francisco, flanked by his sister and a small team of employees. They had organized a meeting for clients impacted by the data breach, a chance to speak directly to those who had been affected. It was a stark departure from the high-rise boardrooms and corporate events he was used to. The room filled slowly, a mix of individuals from all walks of life. Some looked wary, others visibly angry. Jameson felt the weight of their stares as he stepped to the front of the room, but he didn't falter. Good afternoon, he began, his voice steady. I'm Jameson Carter, and I'm here to take responsibility for what happened. The breach in our systems wasn't just a failure of technology, it was a failure of leadership. And for that, I'm sorry. The room was silent, the tension palpable. Jameson continued, his gaze moving across the faces in the crowd. I know that an apology alone doesn't fix the damage that's been done. That's why I want to hear from you. I want to understand how this has affected you and what we can do to make it right. A hand shot up near the back of the room. An older man with graying hair stood, his expression skeptical. What makes you think we trust you enough to tell you anything? You've already let us down. Jameson nodded, the criticism hitting harder than he expected. "You're right," he said honestly. "Trust isn't something I can ask for. It's something I have to earn. And I know that starts here, by listening and taking action." The man sat down, his frown softening ever so slightly. Others began to speak up, sharing their frustrations, their fears, and the challenges they had faced because of the breach. Jameson listened intently, his usual defenses stripped away. For once, he wasn't trying to control the narrative. He was simply there, present and accountable. By the end of the session, the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't warm, but it was no longer hostile. Jameson felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. It was a small step, but it was a start. As the room cleared, Sophia approached him, a glint of approval in her eyes. "Not bad," she said. "You might actually pull this off." Jameson gave her a tired smile. "Only because I'm finally doing it the right way." He glanced at his phone, tempted to update Sophia about what had just happened. But he stopped himself, realizing that this wasn't about proving anything to her. It was about becoming the person he needed to be, not for anyone else, but for himself. The charity gala was a spectacle of grandeur and sophistication, every detail carefully orchestrated to impress. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the room, illuminating the sea of elegantly dressed guests who mingled beneath their light. Sophia Harper stood near the entrance, her gaze scanning the crowd as she adjusted the hem of her simple borrowed dress. Emma had insisted she attend, and after much coaxing, Sophia had reluctantly agreed, though she felt entirely out of place. "You look stunning," Emma whispered, her eyes twinkling as she smoothed a wrinkle on Sophia's sleeve. "Trust me, no one's even going to remember the food tonight once they see you." Sophia rolled her eyes, her nerves evident despite Emma's light-hearted encouragement. "I shouldn't even be here. This is Jameson Carter's world, not mine." Emma smirked. "Well, he invited you, didn't he? That means you're part of it now." Before Sophia could respond, a familiar figure entered the room, drawing everyone's attention. Jameson Carter stepped into the gala, his tailored tuxedo immaculate, his commanding presence undeniable. His gaze scanned the crowd, lingering only briefly before settling on Sophia. For a moment, the noise of the room seemed to fade as their eyes met. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod before making his way toward the stage at the far end of the room. "Looks like someone's glad you came?" Emma teased, nudging Sophia playfully. But Sophia barely heard her. Her chest tightened, a mix of anticipation and unease swirling within her. Jameson took the stage, his voice smooth and confident as he addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his words measured and sincere. "This evening isn't just about raising funds, it's about recognizing the power of community and the importance of standing together, especially in difficult times." The room erupted in polite applause, but Sophia's focus remained on him. There was something different about the way he carried himself, less polished, more genuine. He spoke not as the untouchable businessman she had first met, but as someone who had been humbled and was striving to connect. As the applause died down, Jameson continued, his gaze sweeping across the audience. "There's someone here tonight who has reminded me of what it means to act selflessly, to step up when it matters most. Sophia Harper, would you join me for a moment?" Sophia froze, the color draining from her face. Emma gave her a gentle push. "Go," she whispered. "You've got this." Sophia hesitated before slowly making her way to the stage. Each step felt heavier than the last, the eyes of the crowd making her skin prickle. When she finally reached Jameson's side, he extended his hand to help her up. She took it reluctantly, her heart pounding. Sophia stood beside Jameson, the heat of the spotlight bearing down on her as murmurs rippled through the audience. She kept her gaze forward, refusing to meet the curious stares of the crowd. Jameson, however, remained poised, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos swirling inside her. "This woman," Jameson began, his voice steady and clear, "reminded me of the kind of person I want to be. Sophia Harper acted without hesitation when I needed help the most. She didn't ask for recognition or reward. She simply did what she believed was right." The applause that followed was polite but distant, and Sophia couldn't help but feel the artificiality of the moment. To her, this wasn't about celebrating her actions. It was another staged event in Jameson's carefully curated world. Still, she stood her ground, determined not to let the discomfort show. Jameson turned to her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I know you don't want to be here," he said, his tone soft but firm. "But this isn't about me. It's about showing people that real change starts with small, meaningful actions. And you've been the catalyst for that." Sophia blinked, caught off guard by his candor. For a moment she considered walking off the stage, but something in his expression, earnest, almost pleading, kept her rooted in place. She nodded slightly, though her discomfort lingered. Turning back to the audience, Jameson continued, "We all have the power to make a difference, no matter how small it may seem. Sophia has reminded me of that, and for that I'm deeply grateful." The applause this time felt warmer, more genuine, but Sophia barely registered it. Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts, gratitude, frustration, and an odd sense of pride she wasn't ready to acknowledge. As the applause subsided, Jameson stepped aside, allowing her a chance to speak. Sophia's heart leapt into her throat. She hadn't prepared for this, and the weight of the moment threatened to overwhelm her. She glanced at Jameson, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. I don't know what to say," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't expect any of this, and honestly, I don't think I deserve it. I just did what I thought anyone else would do." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the audience. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not about doing something extraordinary. It's about doing something when it matters. And if that's what tonight is about, then I'm honored to be here." The room erupted into applause, but Sophia felt a strange calm settle over her. As she turned to leave the stage, Jameson leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "You were perfect." Sophia glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm still not sure what you're trying to prove," she said quietly. "Maybe I'm just trying to prove that I can change," he replied, his tone sincere. As they stepped off the stage together, the noise of the gala faded into the background. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that despite her reservations, Jameson's words carried a weight she hadn't expected, a weight she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. The days following the gala brought an eerie calm, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. She'd returned to her routine at the Havenview Hotel, relieved to slip back into anonymity. Yet Jameson Carter's words and his growing presence in her life remained a stubborn echo in her mind. No matter how much she tried to focus on her work, she couldn't ignore the changes she'd seen in him, or the way he seemed determined to include her in his journey. That uneasy quiet shattered one morning when Sophia entered the staff break room to find Emma scrolling furiously through her phone, her face pale. "You need to see this," Emma said, shoving the device toward Sophia. Sophia frowned, taking the phone. The headline glaring back at her sent a chill down her spine. Jameson Carter, caught in scandal, alleged affair with hotel maid Sparks' outrage. Beneath it was a grainy photo of her and Jameson at the gala, mid-conversation. The angle made it look far more intimate than it had been, and the accompanying article spun a lurid tale of power dynamics and impropriety. It was a complete fabrication, but the damage was already done. Her stomach churned as she skimmed the text. The writer painted her as a social climber, suggesting she had used Jameson's gratitude to manipulate him for personal gain. Every word felt like a blow, twisting the truth into something unrecognizable. "This can't be real," Sophia muttered, her voice trembling. "It's everywhere," Emma said grimly. "Social media, news sites. Lucas Gray's been quoted in half of them, implying that you're some sort of distraction for Jameson." Sophia sank into a chair, her head in her hands. Lucas. She barely knew the man, but she didn't need to. This had his fingerprints all over it, a calculated attack to undermine Jameson's credibility while dragging her into the mud for good measure. Before she could process what to do next, her phone buzzed on the table. The name flashing on the screen made her heart drop. Jameson Carter. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the phone. Emma gave her a nudge. "You need to answer that." With a deep breath, Sophia picked up. "What's going on?" she demanded, skipping any pleasantries. "I'm sorry," Jameson said immediately, his voice heavy with guilt. "I didn't see this coming. Lucas is—" "I don't care about Lucas," Sophia snapped, cutting him off. "I care that my name is being dragged through the dirt because of you." There was a long pause, and when Jameson finally spoke, his tone was quieter. "You're right. This is my fault and I'm going to fix it." "How?" Sophia asked, her voice sharp. "You can't just wave a hand and make this disappear." "No," he admitted, his tone resolute, "but I can tell the truth." Sophia laughed bitterly. "The truth? That'll only make it worse. They don't want the truth, Jameson. They want a scandal." "Then I'll give them a different story," he said firmly. "One where they see who you really are, not the version Lucas is selling." Sophia exhaled sharply, her grip tightening on the phone. "And what exactly is this different story going to accomplish? Do you think people will magically stop believing the lies?" "They might not," Jameson admitted. "But I owe it to you to try. You didn't ask for any of this, Sophia, and I won't let you become collateral damage in my fight with Lucas." His sincerity gave her pause, and for a moment she didn't know how to respond. The fire in his voice was real, but the weight of the situation felt insurmountable. Finally she spoke, her voice steadier than she felt. "You have until the end of the day to fix this, Jameson. After that, I'm walking away from all of it." The line went silent for a beat before he replied, "I'll handle it." When the call ended, Sophia set the phone down and buried her face in her hands. Emma placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He sounded serious," Emma said softly. "Maybe he really can fix this." Sophia let out a bitter laugh. "It doesn't matter what he says. The world loves a scandal, and I'm just an easy target." Hours later, Sophia sat in her tiny apartment, glued to her laptop as she scrolled through endless articles and social media posts dissecting the so-called affair. Each headline seemed worse than the last, the comments below them teeming with vitriol and speculation. She felt exposed, her life reduced to fodder for public entertainment. A sudden knock at her door jolted her from her thoughts. She hesitated before opening it, her heart sinking when she saw Jameson standing there. He looked exhausted, his usual polished appearance disheveled, but his determination was unmistakable. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Sophia stepped aside, closing the door behind him. "You have something to say? Or are you just here to tell me how sorry you are again?" Jameson turned to face her, his expression unyielding. "I spoke with my legal team. We're drafting a statement, but that's not enough. Lucas won't stop until he gets what he wants, my reputation in pieces, and you're an easy way for him to make that happen." Sophia crossed her arms, her gaze cold. "Then why involve me in the first place? You could have left me out of it." "You saved my life," Jameson said simply. I didn't think about how that might make you a target, but now I'm thinking about it, and I'm going to protect you." "How?" she pressed, her tone sharp. "With more statements, more promises. None of that will erase what's already out there." Jameson hesitated, then took a step closer. "You're right, I can't erase it. But I can shift the narrative. Lucas is trying to paint you as someone you're not, a social climber, a manipulator. But if people see the real you, they'll stop listening to him." Sophia shook her head, a humorless laugh escaping her lips. "And how do you plan to do that? Parade me in front of cameras? Turn this into another one of your PR spectacles?" "No," Jameson said firmly. "No cameras, no performances, just honesty. I want people to see you, not because you're connected to me, but because you're someone worth knowing." Sophia's walls wavered, but she wasn't ready to let them down. "And what happens when this blows up in your face? When it makes everything worse?" Jameson's expression softened. "Then it's my face on the line, not yours." For the first time, Sophia saw something in him that she hadn't before: selflessness. It wasn't about his ego or his image anymore. It was about her. And while she wasn't ready to trust him completely, a small part of her wanted to believe he meant it. "Fine," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But if this backfires, I'm gone. No second chances." Jameson nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "It won't backfire. I promise." The following day, Sophia watched nervously as Jameson held a press conference. He stood at the podium, cameras flashing incessantly as reporters jostled for position. He began by addressing the data breach, taking full responsibility for the failure and outlining the steps his company was taking to make amends. But it was his closing remarks that left everyone stunned. "There's been speculation about my relationship with Sophia Harper," Jameson said, his voice steady but resolute. "Let me be clear. Sophia is not the person the media has painted her to be. She is hard-working, selfless, and courageous. She saved my life when no one else could, and she's done nothing to deserve the scrutiny she's facing now." The room erupted with questions, but Jameson silenced them with a raised hand. "This isn't about me or Lucas Gray. This is about giving credit where it's due. Sophia Harper is a hero, and I won't let anyone tarnish her name for their own gain." As the press conference ended, Sophia sat in her apartment, watching the coverage with a mixture of relief and trepidation. The narrative was shifting, but she knew the battle wasn't over. Still, for the first time, she felt like she wasn't fighting it alone. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to anymore. Sophia stood on the balcony of her apartment, the cool evening breeze brushing against her face as she stared out at the glittering San Francisco skyline. The air was heavy with the remnants of the day's chaos, the press conference, the flood of news articles reframing the narrative, and the endless stream of texts and calls she'd ignored. Her life had become a spectacle, a story for the masses to dissect, and it left her feeling exposed in a way she hadn't thought possible. Her phone buzzed again on the small table beside her. She glanced at the screen, her chest tightening when she saw Jameson's name. She hesitated before picking it up. "Hello. I just wanted to check on you," Jameson said, his voice softer than usual. "I know today wasn't easy." Sophia let out a dry laugh, leaning against the railing. "Easy? I spent the entire day watching strangers argue about my life like it's some kind of entertainment. So no, Jameson, it wasn't easy." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his tone was laced with guilt. "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." Sophia closed her eyes, her frustration warring with the part of her that wanted to believe him. "I know," she admitted after a moment, "but that doesn't make it any easier to deal with." "I know," he said quietly, "but I meant what I said today. You don't deserve this, and I'm going to do everything I can to make it right." Sophia sighed, the fight in her slowly draining away. You keep saying that, but what if it doesn't work? What if it just keeps getting worse? Then I'll keep trying, Jameson replied without hesitation. I'm not giving up, Sophia. Not on you and not on fixing this. Something in his voice, steady, resolute, made her pause. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but Jameson had started to change. The cold, distant businessman she had first met was gone, replaced by someone who seemed to genuinely care. It terrified her as much as it comforted her. I don't know what to say, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to say anything, Jameson replied. Just don't give up on me yet. Sophia swallowed hard, the vulnerability in his words tugging at something deep inside her. I'll think about it, she said finally. The next morning, Jameson sat in his office, poring over the aftermath of the press conference. His PR team had been cautiously optimistic, noting that public sentiment was beginning to shift. But he knew the battle was far from over. Lucas Gray was still a looming threat, and his relentless attacks on Jameson's character and leadership hadn't slowed. Mr. Carter, his assistant said, poking her head into the office, Sophia Carter is here to see you. Jameson nodded, gesturing for his sister to enter. She strode in, her expression unreadable as she took a seat across from him. So, she began, crossing her arms, you've managed to buy yourself some goodwill, but what's your next move? Jameson leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. I need to take this further. The press conference was a start, but actions speak louder than words. Sophia raised an eyebrow. And what does that mean? It means I'm done letting Lucas dictate the terms, Jameson said firmly. If he wants a war, I'll give him one. But I'll do it my way. No mudslinging, no games, just real, tangible changes. Sophia tilted her head, intrigued. Such as? Jameson's expression hardened. I'm restructuring the company. I want a new focus on transparency, ethics, and community engagement. This isn't just about salvaging my reputation, it's about proving that Carter Technologies can be better. Sophia regarded him carefully, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. You're serious about this? I am, Jameson replied, and I want Sophia to be part of it. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. Sophia Harper. Are you sure that's a good idea? She's already under enough scrutiny. That's exactly why I need her, Jameson said. She's the reason I'm even thinking this way. Her honesty, her integrity. It's what this company needs. Sophia nodded slowly, though her concern was evident. Just be careful, Jameson. You're putting a lot of weight on her shoulders. I know, Jameson said, his tone resolute. But I also know she can handle it. Later that afternoon, Jameson found himself standing outside Sophia's apartment, a folder of documents in hand. He'd thought about calling her first, but decided against it. This conversation needed to happen face to face. He knocked twice, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. Sophia opened the door cautiously, her expression shifting from surprise to guarded curiosity when she saw him. Jameson? What are you doing here? I need to talk to you, he said simply, holding up the folder. Can I come in? Sophia hesitated, her instinct to say no warring with the curiosity sparked by the seriousness in his tone. Finally, she stepped aside, letting him enter. This better not be more damage control. It's not, Jameson said, as he set the folder on her small kitchen table. It's about moving forward. Sophia sat across from him, her arms crossed. Forward? After everything that's happened, how do you expect me to just... I'm not asking you to forget, Jameson interrupted, his voice calm but firm. And I'm not asking you to clean up my mess. I'm asking you to help me build something better. Sophia frowned, her skepticism evident. What are you talking about? Jameson opened the folder, sliding a document toward her. This is a proposal for a new initiative at Carter Technologies. It focuses on transparency, ethical practices, and community outreach. Real changes, not just for show. Sophia scanned the document, her brow furrowing as she read. And where do I fit into this? I want you to be part of it, Jameson said, his gaze unwavering. Your perspective, your values, they're exactly what this needs. Sophia looked up at him, her disbelief evident. You're serious. I am, Jameson said. This isn't just about fixing my reputation or beating Lucas. It's about doing the right thing, and I can't do that without people like you. Sophia leaned back in her chair, the weight of his words settling over her. Part of her wanted to push him away, to tell him that this wasn't her fight. But another part, the part that remembered the fire in his voice at the gala and the vulnerability in his apology, was tempted to believe him. What happens if it fails? She asked quietly. If people don't believe it? Then we keep trying, Jameson said without hesitation. This isn't about instant results. It's about laying the foundation for something real. Sophia studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of the man she'd first met, the man who had seemed so distant and unapproachable. But he wasn't there anymore. In his place was someone who genuinely seemed to care, someone who was trying to be better. Okay, she said finally, her voice steady. I'll help, but only because I believe in what you're trying to do, not because I believe in you. Jameson nodded, accepting her terms. That's fair. And thank you. As they worked through the details of the proposal, Sophia felt a small, tentative hope take root. For the first time, it felt like she was no longer just reacting to the chaos around her. She was part of shaping something new. And though she wasn't ready to trust Jameson completely, she realized that maybe, just maybe, he was someone worth believing in. By the end of the week, Carter Technologies unveiled its new initiative. Jameson led the announcement with Sophia at his side, her presence a quiet but powerful reminder of the values they were striving to uphold. The response was cautious but positive, a flicker of trust beginning to grow among the public. Lucas Gray predictably dismissed the initiative as a desperate attempt to save face, but Jameson refused to engage, focusing instead on the work at hand. His resolve only strengthened as he saw the impact their efforts began to have, not just on the company, but on the people it served. One evening, as Jameson reviewed a set of reports in his office, Sophia appeared in the doorway. "You're still here?" she asked, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Someone's got to keep this ship afloat," Jameson replied, gesturing to the papers in front of him. Sophia stepped inside, her hands tucked into her pockets. "You know, for a guy who built an empire on being in control, you've gotten pretty good at letting go." Jameson looked up at her, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Maybe I just needed the right reason." Sophia rolled her eyes, though her smile lingered. "Don't get too comfortable. We've still got a long way to go." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Jameson said, his tone genuine. As Sophia left his office, Jameson leaned back in his chair, a sense of peace settling over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path, not just for the company, but for himself. And while he didn't know what the future held, he was certain of one thing: he wasn't facing it alone. The air was crisp as Sophia stepped onto the balcony of the newly renovated Carter Community Center, her gaze sweeping over the crowd gathered below. It was the grand opening, and the atmosphere buzzed with excitement and hope. The center was a tangible symbol of the new direction Carter Technologies had taken, a project dedicated to serving the community and fostering opportunities for those in need. Sophia still couldn't believe she was a part of it. From her vantage point, she could see Jameson mingling with the guests. He looked different, not just in appearance but in the way he carried himself. The once imposing aura of control had softened into something more approachable. He laughed easily with a group of local leaders, his sharp suit blending seamlessly with the casual warmth of the event. "Quite the transformation, huh?" a familiar voice said behind her. Sophia turned to see Emma, who had volunteered to help with the event, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Her friend's grin was mischievous as she nodded toward Jameson. "From corporate kingpin to man of the people, I didn't think he had it in him." Sophia smirked, though her thoughts were more complicated. "He's come a long way." Emma raised an eyebrow. "And what about you? You're the one who got him to take that first step." Sophia shook her head, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "I didn't do anything. He made his own choices." "Sure," Emma said, her tone teasing, "but let's not pretend you didn't nudge him in the right direction." Sophia didn't respond, her attention returning to the crowd. Seeing the center come to life filled her with a quiet pride. For so long she had kept her world small, afraid of the pain that came with opening up. But working on this project had reminded her of the power of connection, not just with others, but with herself. As the speeches began, Sophia slipped into the back of the crowd, preferring to watch from a distance. Jameson took the stage, his presence commanding yet unassuming. He began by thanking the team that had made the center possible, his words genuine and heartfelt. "This isn't just a building," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "It's a commitment, a promise that we can do better, not just as a company, but as individuals. And none of this would have been possible without the people who believed in the power of doing what's right, even when no one's watching." Sophia's breath hitched at his words, and for a fleeting moment she thought his gaze landed on her. She quickly dismissed the thought, shaking her head at her own sentimentality. As the applause swelled, Jameson stepped down from the stage, his expression thoughtful as he wove through the crowd. He spotted Sophia near the back and made his way toward her, his steps deliberate but unhurried. "I didn't see you up front," he said when he reached her, a teasing lilt in his voice. "I'm not a fan of the spotlight," Sophia replied with a faint smile. "You already know that." Jameson chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "Fair enough. But you deserve to be celebrated, you know." "I'm fine right here," she said, crossing her arms lightly. "This is your moment, not mine." Jameson shook his head. "That's where you're wrong, Sophia. None of this would exist without you. You didn't just save my life. You changed it." Sophia met his gaze, her defenses momentarily faltering under the weight of his words. "You give me too much credit," she said softly, though her voice lacked the usual edge of deflection. Jameson smiled, but it wasn't the polished, calculated smile she had seen in the past. It was genuine, almost vulnerable. "You've taught me more than anyone ever has, about honesty, about integrity, and about what it means to actually care." Sophia opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the arrival of a group of children running into the courtyard, their laughter filling the air. Jameson glanced toward them, his expression softening. "That's what this place is all about," he said. "Giving people a chance to dream, to feel safe. That's a legacy worth building." Sophia followed his gaze, a flicker of pride warming her chest. "It is," she agreed, "and it's a good start." Jameson turned back to her, his expression more serious now. "I want this to be more than a start, for the center, for the company, and for us." Sophia froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Us?" she repeated, the word heavy with unspoken possibilities. "Yes, us," Jameson said, his voice steady but earnest. "I know I've made mistakes, big ones, but I'm not that man anymore, and I don't want to do any of this without you." Her instinct was to push him away, to retreat into the safety of solitude. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected: hope. Not just for himself, but for what they could build together. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "You really think we can make this work?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do," Jameson replied without hesitation, "because you make me want to be better, and because I think we've already proven that we're stronger together." Sophia hesitated, the weight of her past fears pressing against her. But as she glanced around at the bustling community center, the tangible proof of what they had accomplished, she realized that taking a chance might be worth it. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady but soft. "But no grand gestures, no speeches, just honesty." Jameson's smile widened, relief washing over his features. "Honesty it is." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, the noise of the crowd fading into the background. For the first time in a long time, Sophia felt a sense of peace, a belief that she wasn't just surviving, but truly living. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the courtyard in a warm, golden light, Jameson extended his hand. Sophia took it, her fingers intertwining with his as they turned to face the future together. And for the first time, both of them felt like they were exactly where they were meant to be.